Hi, everyone. If you're signed in here for episode 6 of VC Live, we will be starting shortly. We're just waiting for people to come in, and we will be going live in a couple of minutes. Just some housekeeping announcements till then. We would request you to keep your videos off and keep yourselves on mute. If you have any questions or comments, please share them in the chat box and we'll try to pick them up during our conversation with the speaker a little later in the evening. Give us a couple of minutes and we will be starting soon. Hi, everyone. A very, very warm welcome this evening to the 6th episode of BC Live by Godrej Locks. A warm welcome to everyone on a hot, sultry day, and we're hoping that it's going to be exciting as over the next hour, we've got some very fun but informative things to discuss. Before we start, I would request all our guests to keep their videos off and to keep themselves on mute. In case you have trouble hearing me, please put it down in the chat so that I know. But what we will be doing is we will be introducing what we do, why we do it, and we will be calling on our speaker, a very special speaker for the evening. So without further ado, let me first start by telling you what we're doing. We are the Value Co-Creators Live, which is VC Live. It is a monthly series of interactive and educative conversations with experts in the field of architecture and design. In the first season of this initiative, which is this, we are addressing various aspects of what makes design conscious and how can one design consciously. What does it mean? What does it entail? And how it can be achieved? So through informal but insightful conversations with experts as well as young talent, we hope to define an equitable and empathic process of creating environments that are responsive to the needs and aspirations of its environments and its inhabitants. So this is being brought to you by Godrej Locks. It's an initiative which is a part of the Godrej Value Co-Creators Club, which is GVCC. This was established last year. The GVCC is a platform for nurturing the architecture and interior design community. Through this platform, Godrej Locks and Architectural Fittings and Systems seeks to build strong relationships with practitioners through regular engagement and educative endeavors such as this. We also hope to increase awareness and encourage free flow of information about ideologies, practices, and products, as well as facilitate better understanding of market trends. Exclusive co-creator benefits include inclusive access to new products and services, networking opportunities in your city, and a lot more. So far, the club is about 1,200 members strong. It is pan-India. And if you would like to enroll, please reach out on email or via a number, the details of which are being shared with you in the chat right now. While GVCC is an incentive-driven program, it also hopes to celebrate design through excellence through an annual awards program called the GVs. It also engages with the community and initiatives such as the Value Co-Creators Live or VC Live, with Sneha and I have the pleasure of co-curating and hosting, and this one being the 6th session of the first season. So a quick introduction to who we are. Sneha and I have put this together for Godrej. So Sneha is a trained creative writer, educator, and curator of storytelling experiences. Having previously worked with Jaipur Rugs, Godrej Properties, El Decor, Exchange for Media, her focus currently lies in brand and marketing communication. She enjoys working with design, luxury, retail, real estate, fintech, and social impact brands. I, on the other hand, am an architect by training. I have been practicing, I have practiced architecture and lighting design. I've taught at university, researched historical narratives, and have been the founding editor of Mondoarc India and Stir. My curiosities currently lie in questioning normative mechanisms in the creative community, usually through written and curatorial practices. So Sneha and I are bringing this to you today. Sneha, can I ask you to come on and say hello quickly?
Yes, hi everyone. Good to see such a good audience joining us today. And yeah, looking forward to today's session, just like everyone else. Over to you, Mrinalini.
Thank you. Excellent. We're all very excited about today's session. It is very special, especially for me, given that I'm an architect. And also for both Sneha and me and Godrej, because these investigations that we've been a part of in the past few months have led us to discuss various subjects. And that has led us to our masterclass today, which is titled Prefabricating Forms and Norms. Now, prefab, as we all know, is short for prefabricate, which means made beforehand. In the architecture, design, and construction industry, it is often referred to sections that are manufactured in off-site facilities and then shipped and assembled to create a finished product on site, which are often buildings. We have started manufacturing entire buildings using this method. And while prefab was earlier used as a noun or an adjective, today has become an active verb, therefore prefabricating. So prefab architecture, even though it has been around since the age of industrialization, when assembly lines and factory fit-outs took the lead in all production-led systems and services. It has taken its own sweet course for the idea to infiltrate into our economy in India, which is rather labor-intensive and inexpensive labor for that, right? But it has started to catch steam, and it is becoming more and more popular for various reasons, be it cost, quality, control, or even caution. So today we would like to talk about how prefabricated systems are creating forms and perhaps even changing norms globally and in India. And to discuss this, we have with us none other than Sidhartha Talwar of Studio Lotus. Sidharth, if I could request you to come and say hello.
Hi everyone.
Hi, so happy to have you here with us, Sidharth. Very excited for this session and looking forward to what you have to share with us. But before we begin, a quick introduction to Sidharth. A lot of you already know who he is. He is a co-founder and the principal of Studio Lotus, which we all know is an award-winning multidisciplinary design practice based in New Delhi. Since establishing the practice with Amrish Arora and Ankur Chokshi in 2002, Sidharth has overseen its architecture and master planning initiatives, working extensively on large-scale developments with a focus on spatial articulation, environmental planning, and sustainable and modular construction methodologies. Sidharth can be credited for some highly acclaimed projects, such as the Krishi Bhavan, which has been in the media a fair bit, Raj Jodhpur, Max Estates, and the upcoming Devanya in Himachal Pradesh, among many others. But what we are particularly keen to discuss today are those works that have gone beyond conventional means, such as on-site construction processes and in-situ casting, and have instead demanded off-site predetermined components. So Sidharth, a very warm welcome. And yet once again, before we hand over the floor to you, I thought it might be interesting to ask our audience today. I think we've got like hundreds of people who've joined in on Zoom and also on social media. But we thought it might be interesting to ask them what their understanding of prefabricated architecture and construction systems are. So Rudra, if we could have the first poll, let's find out what the audience feels, and then let's see how that compares to what is actually happening. So the question that we are asking you is, when you think of prefabricated architectural construction systems, what kind of buildings come to mind at first thought? Are they multi-stacked commercial and residential high-rises? Are they large-scale widespread housing? Is it customized hospitality ventures? There's a lot of that we are seeing. Public infrastructure, or perhaps all or none of the above. So if we can give a couple of seconds to our audience to answer that, we might get an idea of what a general consensus is. And then let's see what Sidharth has to say about it. So maybe we can pull up the results right away. Sidharth, can you see the results on your screen?
Yes.
It's interesting that we've got most people, well, actually all of the above, and of the options that have been given, multi-stacked commercial and residential high-rises is the first thing that comes to mind. And large-scale widespread housing is probably the second, or close to public infrastructure. Whereas customized hospitality ventures is not something that is very popular. We also have some comments coming in where people are talking about modular containers and container buildings, right? So it'll be interesting to see how you respond to some of this, or what you have in store for us when you give your presentation. So the stage is all yours. The floor is yours, Sidharth.
Thank you, Mrinalini, for the introduction. Thank you, Sneha and Mrinalini, for inviting me for this topic. 1 second.
Yeah. So Sidharth's going to be sharing his screen and a presentation. I've had a sneak peek at it, and it's fascinating to see the kind of ground that has been covered in this.
Yeah. Is the screen clear?
Yes, we can see you.
Thank you. So when we spoke about the topic, I think it's an area where we at Studio Lotus has been constantly working upon I think it's finding more and more relevance in today's time, and of course going forward in the near future, where it's an area of deep research for us. And what we are going to talk about and what I'm going to show you is pretty much something we are constantly working on, researching on, and exploring through our projects. That's the medium we have to really talk through our projects. One second. Yeah, as explained earlier, prefabricated construction has been quite clearly explained by you, Mrinalini. But let's say, what are the various scales of prefab, which we are looking in our world today? And for me, or for us, it could be pretty much as small as daily utility item, something like flat pack furniture, where it started at, something at more customized furniture, but something which is in daily use, which we all know of. So that's like the immediate kind of relationship to prefabrication really at home. And I think this is finding more and more relevance is the small scale living unit, which in a way is relatable to the customized hospitality ventures, I think, which was part of the poll, where I feel this will find more and more relevance looking at the geographic locations, where a fully fitted out unit can be placed as a pod. So I think that's the next extension of prefabrication to us. And of course, then it goes down to Ravena's project, where we are talking about a very large scale housing, which of course internationally, through the government funding and through the policies, it's gained ground. Of course, we'll come to how it will gain ground in the Indian context, but in the international context, it's pretty much relevant and prevalent at a low cost housing scale. And of course, how this project gives you the modularity and the repetition. And of course, it also gives you, when you give it on completion, and how on the right side upon complete habitation, it does have scope for changes and personalization. So even a prefab construction does not mean you can't like customize it to your needs. There is, of course, a lot of scope to do that as well, which we'll also take you through our some of our works later. The immediate notion of prefabrication would be the large scale factories and the warehouses, which we have seen plenty both internationally and in India. And again, this is what I think the poll also said, like medium to tall buildings, which has again, through whether it's wood construction, whether it's precast concrete construction, which has gained ground and momentum. But I feel again, this subject is very close, that in dense urban fabrics, again, relevant internationally and for us, when you're in a very dense fabric, then how a prefab construction can gain momentum in terms of speed, the ease of construction, not spoiling the territory around, to be pretty much clean at work. Something, you can gain momentum on time and efficiency. It's very relevant. And then probably what does prefab in the context of India means to us? Just a simple first gesture of how at early stages of transportation need to happen. And from the railway sleepers, it came into the precast sleeper. So that was pretty much the first efforts done in the Indian context, in the part housing context, or even the administrative office context, how Hindustan Prefab Limited in the 60s gained momentum and started this movement of prefab, how the bridges have again been, but this is something in terms of precast flyovers, all this has happened and all this is there, but still I find, or we find, there is still a lot of limitations of prefab in the Indian context. While it is gaining momentum, and I'll show you in the next slide, it is a very dominant industry, but still some of the limitations are that the labor is cheap over here, and hence the construction cost becomes cheaper when you do a brick and mortar construction over a prefab construction. Of course, there are not many players offering end-to-end solutions. So still that is a limitation. High transport cost and risk, and the transit is again an issue. And of course, the need of skilled labor, which is growing now, but still a skilled labor for assembly is still an issue over here. But yes, of course, we all know that more safety, independence from different locations, less waste, and higher efficiency in terms of time as cost are always the benefit. So, and what does the future of prefab, look like? And I think it is projected an annual growth of over 8% over the next 4 or 5 years. And it's a very highly competitive market, which has a huge potential growth without many dominant players. And if we were to look at one kind of a catchphrase, which is from Everest, which is one of the dominant players, that if there are no cost overruns and no delays, then for an end user, somewhere the word would be that, can you just be at ease and we can deliver you what we have promised. So that's something pretty important as a word phrase for us. And now, while we know that these are the scale of prefab, and of course, there are some work in India which is not happening even at a larger scale. But what I would like to really focus is what we at Lotus means for us, that what are the possible interpretations of prefabrication in the local context. And for us, I think it would be converting into a pre-engineered approach. And the nuances and notions of pre-engineering, I will show you through some of our projects. But some of the parameters which come immediately would be, building lightly in difficult locations, which is very important and sustainable at this point of time. How repetition can be a part of a prefabrication, pre-engineering process, which we have again explored through our project. Definitely time and speed. We have gone through that process and seen that a quick build project is possible. How we can again build effectively, as I said, in dense neighborhoods. And still, while we are talking about probably the notion as it came to container box housing and a very, kind of a repeat flat panel look, but how context and craft can still infuse it with the way, the way that India is rich with. That character can still be brought into play. And of course, modularity and flexibility is at heart of prefabrication, pre-engineering. Building lightly. This project is in the hills where the context was a very difficult site, right in a forest, in a slope, which is almost 45 degrees. I won't get major details over the project, but as you can see in this diagram, the analysis had a flat 45-degree slope where actually you can't build. It will be difficult to build. But since ground is of utmost importance, land is an utmost important, how a kind of an approach of a modular, like a construction of a tubular construction of 100 mm by 100 mm can create a lattice work, minimal foundation work, very small 2 by 2 feet kind of footings. After that, how the whole construction can run dry, how the members can be easily transported in these difficult slopes, and how a construction of a certain value for scale can still happen. And we've gone through that process. These are the images in progress where where the tubular sections become a kind of a lattice, like a framework, like a bamboo weave, to gain its strength. And hence it creates an overall framework, and then the input and the infills become all the dry work without any concrete or any woodwork. This is meant to be wet work. This is meant to be a luxury villa in the hills. And as I spoke about the construction, a welded system, which is gaining strength by the techniques it's used, but very lightweight, very small section, easy to lift, and actually expandable and contractible in any axis, hence giving enough play for adaptation to happen. And this is the final output where it's a villa which is people are staying here. It's habitable. It's got all the energy parameters, all the insulated parameters to give a very comfortable living. So prefab no way means it can match up to any standards of any comfortable living, which we have demonstrated through that through this project of detailing of the wall sections as well. Repetition means that a project came to us where we need to repeat modules in a very sensitive area next to the sea, and how an off-site prototype of a cottage for a hospitality project took place right here in Delhi. It is a kind of an LGSF system which creates this framework. Everything was tried and tested so that this whole module in 2 parts can actually be transported to the site. Of course, there were issues which we realized after transporting it, but that's how while we do research and prototype, you get to understand these issues. It's right next to the sea within the 500 meter regulation. So it could not be a permanent bill. It had to be practically no wet work. In a tight 3-acre site, how we can fit out about 15 of these cottages to really still create a little kind of an upmarket boutique, club cottage-like resort. And these are the renditions, earlier renditions of that cottage, where while you made the framework in a lightweight structure, but of course the cladding of it, the aesthetic look of it, there are many materials available, again well insulated to take care of the geographical context as well. And these are the site images when the modules or the cottages are brought on the site. As you can clearly see, very small footings. Again, these footings are the small hume pipes which were ready-made and brought to the site. So practically avoiding any level of concrete construction at the site, and the cottages are placed further. And this is reaching towards the final finishing of the project, where shingles and e-board cladding took over to give the aesthetic appeal and the final look and feel of the cottage. An example of modularity and flexibility, it is almost like the video shows building a system, a bolted system, a nodal system which can go in any axis. So these are again prototyping done here, where again a small tubular system of 50 mm by 50 mm, very lightweight, which can be cross-weaved into different directions, and hence it becomes a node which can then expand into any axis. And then to almost see this project, which is again a prototype had happened earlier, we focus a lot on prototyping, where this whole kit of parts, so the building was started to look as a kit of parts, where we detailed every component right from the footing level till the slab level, till the roof level, where all these nodes, whether it has to move in x-axis, y-axis, were figured out, and then how they were again laced or kind of filled in with the final finishing material, which in this case, because it was in Rajasthan, we work with stone because stone is abundant, and that's again for context, we have to fit in the materials which are locally available, not really going far away from that point of view. So how each and every member was detailed out. So now you can see almost 11 feet high stone panels as jalis cutting the hot sun in Jodhpur. On the left, you can see the whole bolted system which got prototype at the side, and at the bottom you see a very small 2 feet by 2 feet footing, and that's practically the only concrete work at the side. These are the prototype images while it is being made, trying to detail out each and every section again, and how the nodes such as windows junctions, how the stones were being transported, how the windows were fitted. It's like any other building, any other project, and how even in a complex site like this, where we didn't want to build heavy, we could really imagine it to be filled up, taking care of all the nuances which any building project needs. So there is no limitation as such for us when it comes to a prefabrication approach as well. And since this is a visitor center in front of Mehrangarh Fort, the whole objective was for the project to sit humbly and very lightly against this majestic fort, which I think we were able to accomplish. It's to the level that is required. This can actually be dismantled and taken away to a different site. It is made from that point of view. This is not permanent, which is again one of the components of prefabricated approach. Time and speed can be shown through this almost like a luxury tented resort, and because the season it shuts in a season, and we had to make it perennial for the full year. And since we had a very short window of 8 to 10 months, how a prefabricated pre-engineered approach can still give us a luxury resort feel, a tented stitched tented approach. So I'm really dwelling upon more the construction aspects than the aesthetic aspects of the project. The project anyways was next to a dam, and we had to tread very lightly. We couldn't do for heavy footings because the dam is very fragile. And we again went into very small 2 feet deep hume pipes to create the construction, to create the footings. And hence, of course, to save time and not add any load and not major disruption to the land available. And then after that process was done, the whole shape of the long 100-meter long, a 60-meter long metal framework came up. And as you can see, the framework was kind of pre-engineered and prefabricated in parts in Jodhpur and then shifted about 50 kilometers away. And very quickly after the footing was done in the month, third and the fourth, we actually was able to create the whole shell of the structure. And then after creating the shell, the image on the left is talking about the insulated dry panels, which takes care of the heat to the extent of 40-45 degrees. And then there was an overlay of the architectural fabric, like the canvas fabric, which gives it that whole tinted appeal to it. It still have customization such as a skylight, which you can see. So over 5-6 months, we were actually able to give shape to the whole project, leaving the interiors out. But the whole project was in shape in about 6 months time. Elevating it, just going back, elevating it above 2 feet level gave us easy ways to maneuver the MEP and the engineering for it. So the even approach helps us in our service integrations as well. So this whole project, including the interiors and the furniture, was actually taken care in about 10 months time. How we can build effectively? As I showed earlier of an IKEA model in an international setup, how a typical Delhi neighborhood where you have builder floors, you have small plots, and if you can see the side, it's covered by houses all around. Now, of course, if you go with the typical brick mortar concrete roof, you can see, you walk through these neighborhoods, you will have all the concrete, all the badarpur, all the bajri lying on the floor. Of course, this is still a research project, but we were able to manage how we can minimize that impact, how we can tell the client that in about 1.5 years time, you will get your project. And of course, no spillover, no issues of destroying the land around. So this is the final look on the left side. And this video again says that how we build the shell with let's say with concrete. The whole inside is adaptable with just again a metal framework, and how based as a concept we can create different floor arrangements within that framework of mild steel. This is while construction, the whole framework is actually a 200 deep I section, and we were able to infill the slab within that I section, giving us actually a flat ground at every level, which again you take away from the typical beam columns, shuttering, giving the shuttering, and then the labor saying, okay, now it will take another 30-day cycle. So the whole repeat cycle became very faster, and it was almost all dry work again. And these are again what you see on the right is in construction, where you have one clean slab line, and that's how a finished approach is on the left. It's a very small, tight 200 square yard plot, but enough light. And I think the structural system played a definite role in giving us, giving shape to this project. These are the finished images on the left. And then finally coming to greater control over time and cost. Of course, we have also researched on our so-called warehousing pure prefabricated project, where everything comes prefabricated outside. All we have done is created the plinth and the groundwork. This is a part of a factory setup where we've done an office for them. So this is all done offsite. This whole project was again done in about 4 to 5 months time frame. All construction to give the walls, to make the walls. And of course, since it's in metal, we used metal. So again, different materials can give the aesthetic look to the project. There is no limitation. There can be various look, various finishes on the outside. You can have, buffering systems to cut the sun, still make it, part of your aesthetics. The image on the left. These are some shots. This is just under completion. So hence it hasn't been documented properly. And again, because it's an office, how the interior aesthetics can really again work with this exposed system. So while the whole metal system, the whole structural system exposed, but you can infill it the way you want it. And this is another shed next to it, where again, it's again a prefab, but how we can create a skinning device, how we can still elevate the senses and not really to look at it at typical warehouses, how the whole workshop space can also be enriching in terms of its visual appeal. This is a render of the other project in construction right now, and how small details such as this here we are working with Kirby, how small details can still add up to the aesthetic value and the engineering value of the project. So that's another project which is nearing completion. And while all this has happened, as I mentioned earlier, how context and craft, how India is rich with handcrafting. So how that can still give it that warmth and the character of a home. So in the Hill project, still being a home, there are multiple layers through which we can add that character, through wood, through stone, through the local craftsmen, giving carving local patterns into doors. That all can still happen in still a prefab, pre-engineered approach. There is no limitation as such, since this is a luxury villa. So we have, of course, a lot of elements thrown in, but even in the desert Jodhpur project, how still working with the masons, it is a kind of a combination that while some approach has happened off-site and brought to the site, we know India is rich in craft and handworking. So we still want to celebrate it, and how that can still find meaning into our projects. I don't think in an Indian context, we can become 100% mechanized if you're looking at this level. So how even the local artisans can work and collaborate with us on these projects. And even in the tented property, layering it with textile fabrics, there is no, so while you've done a typical carcass made out of metal and drywall, but how the inside layering can change the whole character of that tented cottage. This is the Chhatrasagar process. And of course, this is still more aspirational, where we intend to go. Of course, it's a image from outside, but somewhere we are aspiring to go is to really build out fully customized pods, remote locations, how easily they can be transported there, and how they are still high on design. So that's something more of an aspiration for us going down in future. I think that's about it. I think I managed within 20 minutes.
So that was fabulous. I was noticing that you're rushing through your presentation to make time. Thank you for that. That also allows us for ample time for a discussion afterwards. We're getting a lot of questions and comments on Zoom and on social media. So this is, it's very exciting. And I think one common question that we're getting from a lot of people, and I actually wanted to start this conversation based on that, was that prefab is something that we associate with at an international scale, right? Like we look towards the West when we're talking about prefabricated architecture and construction systems. We look at a lot of things that are mechanized and are happening in factories and that are coming and being installed on site. But that's not something that's not conventional for India. So do you think that this is becoming a norm, or this is catching on in the country today?
100%. I think it is a matter of time. I think, even the government, even the Ministry of Housing now acknowledges the acceptance of prefab construction in housing. And I hope it started extending towards housing is a big one. About, I don't know how many, about 90 smart cities need to be made. And of course, a huge amount of housing needs to be catered to. So at such a larger level, actually, there is no other option but to look at this route. And I was, of course, doing our own information seeking. I think there are still very far less players. So in fact, the whole industry has to gear up towards this huge need. So while, yes, we've been looking at the West, but I think it's all about time. Last 5 years has done some work, but at a much larger scale level, over the next 5 years, the way the real estate industry has to grow, the way, high rise has to come, low cost housing has to come. There are enough sectors. While personally at Studio Lotus, we are still, researching and working upon a certain level, but the market is wide open for a huge impetus of a prefab or a pre-engineered approach to happen.
It's interesting that you talked about housing, because, I mean, of course, we all know that in India, there is a housing crisis, right? And we're not just looking at the urban centers, but even in rural India, rural parts of the interiors of the country. So I believe in 2015, the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, which is the PMAY, was launched, which involved manufacturing of about 20 million houses by 2022. Now, I'm not sure how much of that has been achieved, but this was supposed to be for the urban poor, while rural housing, which envisages about 10 million houses, was supposed to be achieved by 2018. Again, not sure how much was achieved. But they had actually, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, which is part of the government of India, had adopted numerous innovative prefab construction systems developed within the country, quote unquote. This is from a website. And so it's interesting to see that in 2015, they're already started officially talking about using prefab systems for large scale housing, right? But that again begs to question this whole idea of India being a very labor intensive economy, and the construction industry over here being very labor intensive and very economical labor, right? Cheap labor, if I may use the word. What happens then? What happens to that labor? Because we are talking about millions and millions of people who are now, we're kind of, what we're suggesting is that you take systems out of their hands, people who are working on site. You see families working on site, right, in urban centers. So we're talking about taking those systems out of their hand and putting them into factories and mechanized, more organized sectors. So do you feel that as an architect, there is a way that we can do this that perhaps sort of rehabilitates them? Or actually, my more fundamental question would be that when we talk about prefab, does it necessarily equate to it being mechanized and shifting into like a machine-based system? Or can it still be labor intensive, but just offsite?
Of course, I feel in my understanding, I don't think it will ever become a Western formula where, because I don't think we'll ever be able to match up to the labor cost equation. It will, but as I mentioned, a win-win is still where, certain components or certain parts of the project where if we can make it more like getting the efficiency of time, lessening the use of wet work, getting it made over there, better transport systems, better packaging systems. So if all that will be mechanized, I'm sure that will be, and I'm sure as these industries goes, the labor requirement of that labor can actually anyways move there, because somewhere down the line you need to kind of train that labor to do that bit.
Right.
While and of course, see, high rises again, I don't know. Of course, high rises will come, and when they come, I think the whole industry and overall construction industry needs to kind of educate better. I think we still, but even in the current scenario where whatever level of high rises or large scale housing or projects we are talking about, it will be still a combination of certain offsite work. And of course, there still will be a decent requirement of on-site work. So even if we were to talk about, doing this whole approach in precast concrete, I think still there is a decent amount of work, even if you do precast concrete elements, but then probably laying the roof or making the walls I don't think at this point of time it has reached to a level that even those components are completely off the side and they're on the side. So maybe the skeleton of it has become offside, but giving it the finish, giving it a look, doing the other components, I feel over the next 5-10 years is still going to remain. Of course, they need to be made better. They need to be engineered better. And then probably after a point, I don't know, we can then talk about the fact that whether it has to go through a complete offsite formula. But right now, I think it will always be a combination of, and of course, if we are moving this direction, then how really that labor can be used offsite? What can be, maybe the government then needs to come up with other schemes that how that labor can be infused and what can be done with that labor and all of that. So it can't be just an approach of adding the prefab, companies forming themselves on that basis. It would still need what government can come up with the current scenario of labor and how to probably balance that out.
I guess it's a matter of like turning it into a hybrid system before you can completely adapt to it, right? And also this idea of upskilling, because right now the kind of labor that we're talking about and the workforce that we're talking about who's constructing on site is unskilled labor mostly. And to kind of upskill them, to turn them into skilled labor so that they can do these things off site and then bring them on. Because again, it's about you can make certain components off site and bring them. You don't have to necessarily make an entire building and then ship it to site, right? And I think that's the whole thing, or at least that would be the next step before we can go any further. But what's also interesting is, and you've mentioned this a couple of times, is this idea of doing certain things off site and then customizing the rest on site, right? And I think that was because a lot of apprehension where we talk about customization where prefab is concerned, because a lot of people just feel that prefab means that you have these containers that are packaged in a factory and then they're shipped and they're just sort of placed where you need them to be placed. But perhaps you could talk a little bit more about customization and talk about how in some of your projects that you're doing that, right? Like, for example, even the seaside resort that you were talking about, all those cottages, it's one thing to kind of build a prototype in Delhi and then transport it to wherever it may be. But how do you actually start personalizing the architecture then?
So in a prefab approach, of course, a whole lot of, so that's again a mindset change, because probably even as architects or even as people in construction, we have to get into the mindset of really, when we say pre-engineering, then a lot of work and a lot of time needs to get into sorting out those details. So we can't really, because a lot of mindset here in construction is, okay, let's get that started, even if it's a house, let's start and then we'll, so probably this whole mindset
figure it out on site.
So there is, of course, a limitation to customization, and how we tackle customization is I'll come to next, but definitely creating the skeleton or creating the structure, one will really have to do a lot of prototype going into it, and whether it's a large scale project with probably lesser details, or even if it is a smaller project with more details. But I think everything needs to be resolved on paper as prototypes, working with the craftsmen, working with the labor, getting that made, testing it out. And I think a lot of hand-holding, a lot of education also needs to happen with the people who I'm working with, because they're also making something new. They are not used to it, but they need to be told about, what impact or result they will have. And of course, then they finally see that result, that, okay, we might have spent a month over here, but then when we went to the site, actually a lot of issues staying at the site or working at site got resolved. That deep diving needs to happen even with the clients, that even the client mindset is such that, are you making my project complicated? Are you making my project expensive? So probably creating that time frame before the actual start of the work at the site needs to happen. That phase needs to be created to really sort those issues out. And once that is sorted and at least a product comes, then you only need to mitigate with issues. If since it's not a thorough process which has been run many times, then at least your issues you're tackling with are minimal, which are resolvable. And then, of course, in any project, how to layer the final finishing, how to create the aesthetics of it, there are a wide variety of materials available. That level of customization is possible. Still, a certain component of labor is there. And because that is there, one still can do certain adjustment at the site to that level. That's what
So I guess step one would be like your planning process, right? And your timeline will have to shift a little bit because, like you said, a lot of us, we start construction or at least start like the foundations and the fundamentals. And then the detailing keeps happening. But here, what we have to do, and this happens a lot in the West. I studied in the West, and that's something where your planning on paper is much longer. The gestation period on paper is much longer before you go onto site. But also tell me something, and this is something which is peculiar to Studio Lotus in a lot of sense, right? You guys tend to use a lot of local material and a lot of local artisans and crafts, and you want to handcraft your buildings. When we're looking at prefabricated systems and we're looking at pre-engineered systems, how does that affect this value? Because what tends to happen, and I would imagine, is that if you are, let's say, building a resort in Goa, but your fabrication is happening in a metropolitan city like Delhi or Bombay or Bangalore, even for that matter, the localization of your processes is not as strong anymore, right? In terms of your material, in terms of the craft that you're using. So let's say if you're going to be, for example, you spoke about the visitor center in front of Mehrangarh Fort. Now, in a place like that, in a situation like that, you're using prefabricated systems, but how do you start to incorporate local material into that? And especially if you have to fabricate at a remote location.
In fact, on the contrary to your question, this aspect has only grown stronger only. I feel while there was that apprehension, there always been, but while we've done through our projects, the combination of the so-called systemization of the process and the engineering of the structure and how to infuse the local nuances, the local character, the local materials. Through this approach, in fact, it has become, I don't see any limitation. It has only brought in far more enriching results only. So like an example, probably in Mehrangarh, for example, we of course have created, and I'll give you an example. We've created a structure, and initially the structure was about 10 feet high. And after, while doing a program, we realized we should have a much higher structure. So we increased the height, and to our thing, we found that actually, and probably the immediate reaction was, would we find stone that high? But actually, we could increase the height of the stone, because stone being a local material, and as you saw, there were jalis were being created to cut the sun along the wind.
Yeah.
So I don't see that as a limitation. In fact, the way we were engineering the thickness of the stone, how it will be brought in. Again, a mindset of the local stone is there is no calculation of any wastage. There is no calculation of what is really required. The thing is, okay, we'll get in stone and then we'll think about it. But here again, to me, even that stone was, of course, the final jali is a handcrafted project, but even the stone went through a little mechanization of, okay, now we need stone of this much thickness. You have to cut this groove to fit in the metal member. So even the craftsmen at the site, the labor working there, understood this, and then we were able to create it. So, for example, any typical tukri slab, we have created, the old homes are with that slab. But through this project, through another project in Hyderabad, we've created much larger spans of the same tukri stone. And that stone can have relief work or carving work, getting inspired by the local context. So that way, I feel getting that in, working with any local material is easily possible. We just need to have the board ready. We need to have the, all the ideas ready. And then while we are working, it's important to understand what all is relevant there, whatever is available there, and how we can, kind of infuse it and layer it into our system. So we found more and more, through more and more explorations, like working with the local craftsmen, working with local patterns, textures, artisans. In fact, it's a complement, it's a kind of a opposite direction. You have at one level a more systematic approach, and to soften it, to warm it up, we can layer it with the whole, like a local context approach, sensibilities.
So in projects like you said, in the hills, right? Was it Himachal or Uttarakhand, the luxury villa? Now, in places like that, right, where you're building in the hills, your local material would most obviously be timber, which would be locally sourced over there. But you've chosen to work with a steel frame, right? Now, of course, that steel frame is fabricated elsewhere, is fabricated remotely, and then brought to site and then assembled over there. Now, advantages of that is that you're building lightly, you have a smaller footprint on site. Tomorrow, what's really interesting, and I'd like to talk a little bit about this also, is that you can dismantle these buildings and you can remove them from there, and therefore leave very little, waste or leave very little residue on site. But again, doesn't this also start to question the idea of your kind of abandoning timber construction, where timber construction is most obvious because that's the local material and that's the local craft, but you are bringing in steel from somewhere else, which is manufactured elsewhere and then brought into site, right? So in a way, is it counterproductive, or what we're saying is that we're just going to do the calculation, weigh the pros and cons, and then see what works better?
No, actually, it's the other way around. While, of course, we are still trying to explore a pure timber construction, but the problem is, at least in India, there is no certified timber. So anyways, to work with an uncertified timber, getting locally doesn't work. And which is why, and probably to depend purely on an imported timber, then of course, then those things come up. While they are sustainable, they are grown on. So definitely our first project was a learning ground. And then in the next villas, what we realize is actually the metal is coming from somewhere close by only. We really not need to depend on, because there are different centers available to bring in the metal. We've created a shed out there where when the members come, now it's kind of to be cut over there, and hence that's happening there. And of course, the storage areas are very minimal. It's not widely spread versus if I was to do in a concrete, then there is no end to that spread. In fact, the whole ground is actually, when you do that, actually you're disturbing the whole ground.
Yeah.
So we did those calculations. We did those. Of course, the steel construction is still cheaper. That's an issue where an imported timber construction is then, of course, much higher. And then, so hence this system came into play. Now there are hybrids where we are in our next project doing part metal construction and certain component timber where we feel that if I need a large span structure in a certain shape, then putting in a pure timber construction is worthwhile. So we deliberate on this and then value that what works best. And in fact, just to add to the Hill project, a regular brick mortar masonry construction, a U value of that versus what we were able to achieve in the so-called prefab, pre-engineered approach, that when we did the metal system and we had the wall insulation and the cladding on either side, and of course, there's a highly detailed section drawn up with a vapor barrier to keep the condensation out. This brought in far better U values because of the insulation in between. So again, we didn't know that, but while doing the project, we realized actually it's a far better thermal comfort is far more than actually a masonry structure.
Okay. I actually want to also highlight that in this particular project, which is the villas in the hills, and this is because I know the project a little more, I'm more familiar with it, is that, and I thought it was very exciting, was that you've actually, the whole construction process follows this idea, because it's so remote, follows the idea of everything that comes into site is something that can be carried by hand by two people, right? So it's not only just the framing that is kind of manufactured off-site and then brought in to be assembled, but everything, all your timber, all your stone, all your panels, everything that's coming into site is something that can literally be carried by hand by two people. So sizing and weight is calculated accordingly and then brought to site. And I think this is the reason I bring this up, is because all of this also falls under the umbrella of pre-engineered construction and architecture, right? And this whole myth that prefabricated is something where you're building a sort of like a completed structure or a completed component in a factory and then bringing it to site is not necessarily true. You can bring components from outside and then assemble them. And how you do that, how you deal with that becomes, starts to sort of inform the way and the process and the system that you follow. So I thought that was something that would be interesting to highlight over here. And of course, we've got 100 questions coming in. So I'm going to start picking some of those up. We've got a lot of people asking about this idea of sustainability, right? Whether prefab is really a sustainable model. Perhaps you'd want to address that.
Yeah, the notion of sustainability could be taken differently in different measure, but for us, if we are responsive to the site, and as I've rightly mentioned, that if we can build lightly, have the minimal impact on the ground, I feel that is sustainable, versus, because, for example, in that same construction, if I would have built a very regular masonry construction, I would have built it on the ground and I would have actually challenged the existing water system. And hence, why this whole, so if I can still retain the original waterways, if I don't disrupt the ecological system, then that's of course sustainable. You have had minimal impact on the ground. As you mentioned, the middle ground is to get the components easy to, which is why 100 mm section came up rather versus a girder. This whole thing could have been a heavy girder, but we chose to do this. So again, something which is, so the whole approach that way is is gearing towards being sustainable only. Unlike at least for the relative to how a villa would have been made in the conventional way and to be made in this way, I feel there is a lot of difference, and that is purely going towards having a more ecological balance of how the whole construction is made to happen. We have been able to keep our sites clean, not mess, and that has become a mandate. We have created a framework how the site will be managed, where what material will be kept. So even keeping the sites clean and not disrupting them in a remote location like in the hills is actually again adding. So I don't know whether part of the answer.
Yeah, for sure. In fact, in continuation to this, there are a number of people who are asking about the cost implications, right? And how we've got a lot of designers and architects practitioners clearly over here, who are saying that they've tried or they've attempted a prefab or they've considered it for projects, but they find that the cost implications are much higher than conventional building. So how do you start to justify that?
So yes, it is it's not an easy one. So I'm with them also, and of course we've had these discussions. So definitely it is on the upper side. I don't still think, and if we are talking at a mass level, then I won't have gone into those detailed calculations, but that is a different context as well. But if in the current in the kind of work we are talking about and the kind of work we've shown, definitely there is an upside, let's say about 10 to 15%. But if we look at it in a larger context of the whole project, and which we have actually showcased, that if we can bring down 4 months of work, 6 months of work at the site. So if you kind of, keep on working on that format. So we have created a regular kind of a construction format and this, and then versus cost, if we can look at time, we can look at the other added benefits of, if we were to guarantee someone that, okay, in a hill, I'm just because I'm like in a remote location, if I can hand over the project to you in 1.5 years, example, with this cost, even if the cost is low, might be 10-15% more than the conventional cost. So even if you can give these two as a framework, that I'm giving you this cost and I'm giving this time, then I don't think for a client probably who's looking of a project, let's say for his home, just to begin with, I don't think it's a huge delta that way. It's even the clients are getting informed more and more, and then more and more we find.
Yeah, you're countering capital cost by telling them that they'll get their project done earlier, faster, and in a cleaner manner, right? Like there's lesser mess. There's also the idea of safety, which becomes very important at construction sites, where you're talking about, just how you construct and where you have this quality assurance when you're building offsite and you're building in controlled environments versus when you're building on-site and building in open environments, right? And we've got questions that talk about, there's some very specific questions that are asking about water and material, and how do you, because you're kind of bringing multiple materials together, and it's not a live process, which is usually done on site. How do you mitigate things like cracks and distancing of materials from each other?
No, in fact, again, on the contrary, any monolith structure, of course, there is a tendency for its own movement. And in a process like this, because the whole construction technique and the detailing takes care of that movement, so we really haven't found any issues as such. And of course, smaller things like if the question is more like, let's say when we do a wall, and of course the wall could crack. So the wall has a double layering inside with a reinforcement. And I think that wall has behaved as good as any other painted wall. So 3 years, 4 years into the project, it has behaved like any other wall, just by having an overlay, staggering the joint, and of course doing a thorough process of how any other wall needs to be treated. So we really haven't overseen any visible, any crack issues and something like that. Nothing at all. It's worked quite well, on the contrary.
What about durability? We've got people asking about how durable are prefab houses and how long do they last, considering, we've got, especially in some parts of the country, you've got extreme weather situations.
So it's so of course metal has its own set of issues, but at the same time, metal is used in seashore piling as well. So there is that debate. What we have done is, probably going back to that image, we have built the foundation higher, probably a feet higher than the ground. Because that's where you get in contact with at least the surface water. So we mitigate that. We have used specific treatments to the metal, which is important and critical, and how that is stored, and then the work done at the site. So that is critical to follow. And of course, in some projects, we have in fact infilled the tubes with sand. So even any kind of contact of water from inside is mitigated. So, and of course, after doing a project, we've understood how even the junctions need to be made better if there is a stagnation of water at a particular junction. So we are now resolving it, have resolved it, because then the only contact with water, which is the primary concern, is then the rainwater to that particular exposed metal. So it's just it's all related to the kind of detailing you need to do, and certain techniques you need to apply to kind of mitigate. Otherwise, it's as I think as long lasting as any other. It's we have got it tested with IIT. So in a zone like hills, which is high on seismic, and it's vetted by reputed agencies, and it takes care of that issue as well. We have done peer reviews for these structures as well.
So we've got, we've talked a lot about using components and building components remotely and then bringing them to assemble. What about, this idea of actually using containers and using built forms to then upscale and to sort of, upcycle them into different purposes? So, for example, the Mahalla clinics that were done in Delhi with the AAP government, and it was, I think, Akshad Bhatt who had initiated this design, where he actually took shipping containers and fitted them out as clinics and placed them across the city. So what do you feel about prefab construction like that, right? Like, if there's this massive opportunity for us to look at, so we're talking about housing, you're talking about infrastructure, public infrastructure, healthcare, and, a lot of it is also disaster relief care. Yeah. So what about something like that?
No, it's huge. The potential is huge, and you're right. The using of recycling those containers and putting into, I would say, even as small as when we talk about the laborers and when we talk about even their living. I think just their living on the site, if this can be upscaled, is just in fact giving them the right place to stay versus. So we did. Of course, it's not, but that was something done on the site, is to give them proper, place to stay. And we used 3 or 4 of those containers and just remodified it for their living. But I think I'm saying even that opportunity is huge, keeping the scale of that, habitation in mind. And of course, as you mentioned about Akshad's project, in fact, I because it's recent, I think he's even upscaled it to, I think, a city hotel where a combination of these containers are also becoming like rooms. Yeah. So I think it's a great idea. So that approach has immense, recyclability, reusability, putting into different sectors. I think it's something which we haven't really gone in detail, but definitely a huge on potential.
So there's somebody asking about, is there any city or state in India which has adopted this or is pushing prefab construction? To which I actually want to say that there was this gentleman, Harpal Singh, who in, I think, many, many years ago, I can't remember when, but he had actually built a 10-story building, prefabricated building, in a span of, I think, 20 or 48 hours. He put up the superstructure, and then in a span of a month, he fitted it out. He did the interiors, and every floor had a different vibe and different style, because some floors were like styled as hotel rooms, some were styled as offices, some were styled as residential units. And his whole thing was to illustrate. It was like a demonstration to say that, we can do this, and to get investors to come and do it, and to kind of buy into his business so that he could start developing further. But I think now it's happening in different parts of the country. We've got architects who are designing container homes, and who, you can actually go and buy a container, like a home as a unit, and go just place it on your site. And so do you feel that that's kind of like a business direction to explore perhaps for architects and designers?
Yeah, it is. I think we myself ended that as something one is looking forward for. But at the same time, your people, architects in Delhi, architect from Bangalore, I think it's called Zenden by Anshul Chauda.
Yes.
He's got into that, and at a small level, as you mentioned about ready-made pods or homes, it's beginning to happen. I don't really, and of course, at a private level, I'm sure there'll be many instances, but I can only talk about a government level probably, and where even at a government level, one of our projects which we haven't shown in Odisha, that has a prefabricated, pre-engineered approach. And the point I'm making is that even at a government level, people are interested, like the government are interested in knowing the pros and cons. It's not something like a open shut case that, okay, we are not interested. They are really deeply interested in knowing that. And if there is, again, a saving of time and all and other aspects, then in fact, they took that on board. It was not 100%, but 50% of that project is keeping this particular route in mind of part off-site construction and part on-site. And I think these are early days, but I think even the government officials are opening up more and more and receptive to these notions. And that's my personal understanding where we've been working at.
Sure. There's somebody who's actually made an interesting comment, Professor Krishna. He says that I was in the US when Moshe Safdie showcased his habitat in Canada's Expo 67, right? And so he talks about how talks about his foresight at that point. And PPVC has become common, he says. So he says now he's in Singapore. So he's tuned in from Singapore, and where he says PPVC was introduced in 2017. But his question is, why is it that after more than half a century, India and other countries have not been able to replicate Safdie's versatility or variable orientation of individual units? It's a very specific question.
I know, I agree. It's in fact, we had a slide of a similar nature, and I happened to keep that out because it just throws open, because many of these works I have seen, even I think Penda's work in Hyderabad, which they have proposed of a multi-storied, unit-based typology. I don't know. I really don't know whether it's going to get constructed or not. But I think the fact remains, at least in Indian context, still eventually, if we are looking of a scale of that nature, in fact, then the whole process of costing, time frame, who's really putting the money, what are whether it's the private sector approval, whether it's the government approvals, meaning there's a whole lot of, like a backward working to be done, and which purely at this level, even in our understanding of the developer market right now, which is still a medium level, I still don't see really even a developer being very easily receptive to a model of such nature. Yes, probably the My1 system and the scaffolding system has taken shape, but to further get into almost a unit-based typology, I think there is time to go, or maybe some fundamental shift in overall education of this market needs to probably happen. That's all I can.
So I think we should be wrapping up soon, but I did have a question, and you showed Alejandro Aravena's housing project, right? And he was quite the controversy when he won the Pritzker. And so we're talking about, so it's one thing to provide housing, and we might be deviating or segueing a little bit from the topic, but it's one thing to provide housing and to provide it in a manner which is cost effective and it's efficient and it sort of ticks all the boxes. But do you think container homes or prefabricated, so like modular homes that are replicated one after the other, does justice to housing and to residential and to the experience that we want to provide to people?
I feel, if as a notion, as an idea, I think it does. Maybe not the container housing, because that I still find it to be more for a temporal use. But till the time, if either is the wall-based system or precast or whatever the arrangement is, if I think architects will play a, if it is a product from the company making it, then yes, they have their own limitation in how to detail it or showcase it. Because then that's the level they have probably reached. But at the same time, if one was to work with the manufacturers, and then if this dialogue can happen, then I think enough probably permutation combinations can be given. It's all about detailing of that, where you can still instill flexibility, character, color schemes, probably need not remain a mundane. So how the architecture, how the massing, how probably some overlapping of the units, how the unit typology can be created to give that variation. I don't necessarily for it to become, so for it to be a, like an almost 100% repeat module, like something like Charles Correa had done in his early days, where he had created a low cost housing. And if we were to talk about recreating that in today's context, and then put the the framework of a prefab or a pre-engineered concept onto it, I think if we were to apply that logic, I think we should get results which are livable, habitable. I don't see that as a constraint.
Great. I like the optimism, Sidhartha, and we're hoping that we can see a lot of that. I'm going to actually close with a quick audience poll. So Rudra, can we pull up poll? Yeah. So I want to ask everyone who's here with us tonight, do you think prefabricated architectural construction processes are appropriate for an industry like ours in India? So let's see what people have to say, given the presentation that we've made. We've talked a lot about how it can be used, how things are possible, and there's a potential for us to be moving in the direction. Of course, there are pros and cons. Are we really ready for it? And if we are, then at what scale? So perhaps we can get the results right away. Strongly agree. Great. That's interesting. It's interesting to see how people respond to these things as well, right? And we still have 5 people who feel that they strongly disagree to this. So maybe it's a matter of time. We just have to wait and watch and see how it goes. But till then, I know Lotus is doing a lot of very incredible work. And Sidhartha, you've been kind of spearheading a lot of this innovation and pushing the limits and pushing the envelope for a lot of innovation and unconventional means and methods. And we're really looking forward to seeing a lot more coming from you guys. And thank you so much for joining us this evening and for a wonderful presentation and a discussion, and for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think I really enjoyed this session. Thank you so much.
I'm very glad to hear that. And also a big thank you to everybody who's joined us from different parts of the world. We know we've got people from Hong Kong and Singapore and London and all of that. It would be great if you could give us some feedback. There is a link attached in the chat box. If you could share with us what your opinion was about today's presentation, and also what you would like to hear more about, and other topics that you'd like to see discussed during the next sessions of VC Live. But we've had a great time, and thank you all. Have a great evening ahead. Thank you, Sidhartha, for being here. So on behalf of Sneha, myself, and Godrej Locks, we thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Please do give us your feedback before you guys leave. And apologies to all those whose questions we were unable to pick up. We were restricted with time, but feel free to send in your questions and we'll try to get Sidhartha to answer them.